Let's talk about half-lives. So the half-life of a substance is the amount of time it takes for the sample to break down by half through radioactive decay. Some half-lives are as short as a few seconds, and some are thousands of years. If you look at this graph, we start with a 1 gram sample. After one half-life, we're left with half of that, which is 0.5. After a second half-life, it's 0.25. After a third half-life, it's 0.125. And after a fourth half-life, it's 0.0625. So you're dividing that sample by 2 every time. So the equation is the number of half-lives is equal to the total time passed divided by 1 half-life. You could also write the equation to say that 1 half-life is equal to the total time passed divided by the number of half-lives, depending on what the question is asking. So for example, if we have a 44 gram sample with a half-life of 13 weeks, how much remains after 52 weeks? So we're going to take 52 weeks, which is the total time passed, and divide it by 13 weeks, which is 1 half-life, and that's going to give us 4 half-lives. So we have to put this 44 gram sample through 4 half-lives. So after 1 half-life, we divide it by 2 and we get 22 grams. Put it through a second half-life and we get 11 grams. Put it through a third and we get 5.5 grams. Put it through the fourth half-life and we end up with 2.75 grams. And that's your answer. You end up with 2.75 grams left of that 44 gram sample after 1 year. Second example, if we have 5 grams remaining after 100 years from a sample that has a half-life of 20 years, how much did we start with? So in this case, we are starting with a final amount, so we have to work backwards, multiplying by 2 instead of dividing by 2. The equation is still the same. We're still going to start with 100 years as the total time passed, and we're going to divide it by 20 years, which is 1 half-life. We end up with 5 half-lives. So we have to put this 5 gram sample through 5 half-lives going backwards, essentially. So we're going to start at the right and say 5 grams after 1 half-life would have been 10 grams, after a second would have been 20 grams, after a third would have been 40. You multiply it by 2 again and you get 80. Multiply it by 2 one more time for the 5th half-life and you get 160 grams. So your final answer here is 160 grams. So originally we started with 160 grams, and if you put that through 5 half-lives, you're going to end up with 5 grams remaining.
Created using Powtoon.